All right, I guess we'll get started. We're only 15 minutes late, so we're not late at all. All right, so my name is Laura Forsyth. I'm the treasurer of the First Nations Student Association, and we welcome you here to our first lecture in empowerment. And to open tonight, we're going to have Marissa Nahani.
Tanoyap, Tanoan Salmon Siaya, Nechem Koshaman, Marissa Nahani, Kuyasna, Skachot Misho Khamel, Tanishko Khamel, Autonox and Squallow and Teat Seats. How's everyone following me so far? Perfect? No need for translation? Greetings to all you honored guests, dignitaries, delegates, chiefs, matriarchs. It's an honor to be here. I am from the Squamish and Nisga'a Nations, and I'm proud of who I am. It's an honor to be here to open up for an esteemed author, lawyer, and to talk about different values in our Aboriginal culture, and it all encompasses many different things. And from my understanding, it's a new book and different mindsets, and how does that affect us? So I'm also intrigued to learn a bit more tonight, and I encourage everyone to have an open mind and think about the words that are going to be shared tonight. It's an exciting time that we are in Aboriginal history, where we can take what has happened into the past and learn from the tools that we have today and see where we can go in the future. I would like to open up the night with the Antiqualia song, Greeting of the Day. This song was written when she was living in Stanley Park. She's one of our last ancestors that lived there, and she was resilient. She didn't want to give up her ways, and she kept a lot of our culture alive. And this has been one of my bases for how I came to be so culturally in depth is that she was told she was no longer allowed to learn her culture, and that wasn't good enough for her. So for me, it's kind of like we take our culture, and where can we go with this? And there's many hurts and challenges that happen in the past, and even yesterday, I take the bus and I miss the C bus, and then I miss my SkyTrain and I'm late for school, and we could hold on to that grudge about all these things that could ruin a day, or we could look at it, learn from it, and make a positive out of it. So tomorrow I'll wake up 10 minutes earlier. So I would like to sing the song is Antiqualia, it's Greeting the Day, and I'm going to use this to open up. Thank you. And it's an honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to the words that will be shared. And I'd like to welcome you to the traditional territories of the three host nations, the Hamatquim, the Skolhotnish, and Tsaleotooth. Hochka.
He went either. We're going to turn up the speaker in a few minutes. I'll go find him. But let's bring on Calvin Helin to start the evening.
Oui, Simgiget, Sigadam Hanoch, Smoiget, Gobble Wells. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank the First Nations Students Association from the Simon Fraser University for inviting me to speak. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to people about something that I'm very passionate about. I'm writing books about these things. And but before I launch into my talk, I wanted to just give you a little bit background on where I come from and who I am. I am from a little northern community, Lac-Lamps, and that little island there is really what the community is named after. It's called Island of the Roses. It's a very, very beautiful place. And I was basically sent away from my community when I was 12 years old. I see Hal Weinberg in the audience. He remembers when I first came out of my little village. And the purpose in coming out of our village was to get a better education. And I was able to get an education, and for that I'm very grateful, because it's allowed me to do all kinds of things that I wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. And if my father were still alive, he would introduce me as the only one in our family who couldn't make it in the family business of commercial fishing. And so he would say that as a result of that, I had to become a lawyer. And the way he said that was created the sense that I otherwise brought an honorable family into something fairly shady in the legal business. And so I have 5 other siblings. My brother John is sitting in the audience. John, you want to put up your hand? And John and I are working together with James Kennedy on some projects, and it's been a really interesting time. And but I'll just explain a bit about background here, if I can get this thing to work. These are just some images from our community. I just got a new laptop. It's supposed to be fast. It's called Windows 8, and it doesn't work at all. So I come from a family of commercial fishermen. As I was saying, I was probably the worst one in our family at catching fish. This was a picture of my little grandson, and I've seen him in here somewhere. During the Olympics, my cousin carved this war canoe, and there was a big lull in between when the athletes arrived and all of the media people arrived. And so we ended up carting this war canoe up 2 escalators in the Pan Pacific Hotel, and it just went absolutely viral. And my little grandson thought he was Napoleon in the front of that. And my brothers are carvers. My brother, pardon me? Oh, I don't know what the hell's wrong with this. So maybe what we'll do is abandon this, and then I'll just to speak. That didn't come up either. Tech people, hello. So that's where I come from. I come from the Tsimshian Nation, and I am. I've started when I'm speaking. I've started dedicating my speeches to various people, and because women, grandmothers, and mothers are so important. In my second book, I wrote a poem called Grandma's Song, and it's of an old lady sitting in the rocking chair with her baby, a little baby in her lap, and she's rocking the baby and she's crying, and her tears are falling and they're landing on the baby's head. And this is a little poem from the baby's perspective. When Grandma cries, tears fall like bombs exploding in my ears. Her heart beats slow, the drum strikes slow, pounding out hard years. Yet in the sadness, the pulse of gladness, the path to wisdom true. When Grandma cries, tears fall like rain, and life, it springs anew. And so that's dedicated to all you grandmas out there and mothers. So I will talk about how I came about to start writing and why I started writing. When I was sent away from my community, my grandmother was a very, very active person in the social, I think, trying to raise up Aboriginal people socially. She was a chieftain of one of the biggest tribes in our community. And when she would talk to me, she said she wanted me to get an education so that I could help Aboriginal people. And after all the years of doing various things, I ended up discharging my obligation to my grandmother and my dad to some extent by writing the first book, Dances with Dependency. When I wrote that book, when I wrote the first version of the manuscript, I circulated it to a bunch of people, and they advised me, they said, what you're written about is true, but it's criticizing the Indian industry. There's about a $10 billion Indian industry of lawyers and consultants and so on, and even some of our own leaders are I believe, responsible for keeping our own people down. And so I'd written about that, and I tried to be as objective as possible. I wrote about the corruption. I wrote about all of the issues that I thought were real issues in our community, and I tried to get my book published, and I couldn't get a publisher. First of all, people said to me, you're just going to get beat up by everybody. You're just painting a huge target on your back. And I submitted it to 32 publishers, and I got rejected by all of them. And fortunately, I'm a failed fisherman and a lawyer, and so I have a pretty thick hide. And so I borrowed some money, and I borrowed about $100,000 and published it myself. And what happened with that book actually surprised me, because I thought what everybody was saying was going to be true. I was just going to get beat up by everybody. What happened is it became a 7 times best-selling book, and the people that made it a bestseller were Aboriginal people in the communities. And what they basically said to me collectively in their response was that what I was writing about resonated with their experience. And there was such a groundswell of support for what I had written about that I actually didn't get very much criticism, at least none that was public. I have a couple of arrows in my back, but that's par for the course. And so in that book, I tried to deal with the issue of why Aboriginal people were going through so much dysfunction. Why are all those statistics out there? How come an Aboriginal woman between the ages of 15 and 25 is something like 15 times more likely to commit suicide? Why does that situation exist for Aboriginal people? And I thought about it, and I wrote about it, and one of the things I started to understand was that by a specific government policy, Aboriginal people were put into a situation of economic dependence. And it was made to be the case because whenever you put anybody into a situation of economic dependency, you can control them. So out of my second book, The Economic Dependency Trap, I had come up with a bunch of principles. And the first principle, if you don't remember anything I say tonight and you leave here, is the more dependent you are on anybody for your sustenance, the less control you'll have over your destiny. And it was done by design because the colonial governments wanted to control Aboriginal resources and take the lands. And it was good to do that way back then when that was your design, but the problem now is we have a huge young Aboriginal population. And it's not just a matter of wanting to do something altruistic to help Aboriginal people out. It's absolutely critical to the Canadian economy that we involve Aboriginal people in the economy and we educate Aboriginal people up to the level of everybody else. In 2007, the Center for I forget exactly what the name of the Center for is in Ottawa, did a study. For the first time, they estimated what the return to the Canadian economy would be of educating Aboriginal people up to the same level as everybody else. And the report concluded the best case scenario was by 2026, Aboriginal people could return over $400 billion to the GDP of Canada. And it sounds like a lot, and it is. But when you look at the ongoing resource control or influence over resources that Aboriginal people have in Canada, it really starts to open your eyes. Take, for example, the 22 comprehensive treaties that are already signed in Canada. Most of them are in the high north. Most people don't understand that those treaties result in Aboriginal people owning, influencing, or controlling over half the Canadian landmass. That's over 5 million square kilometers. That's bigger than all of the European communities together. And Canada is a resource-based economy. And so this has become a very, very critical thing. On top of that, and that's really mostly the Aboriginal groups north of 60. If you look at the First Nations in the southern part of Canada, there's unsigned treaties, mostly in BC, but collectively what's happened as a result of Supreme Court of Canada decisions is that First Nations have to be consulted and accommodated on their lands whenever a major project takes place. It's not a veto, but it sure is being exercised like a veto, if you've seen some of the projects going on in BC. So what I was basically trying to do in that book was to step back and have a look at where Aboriginal people were at and be very honest about it and look at how that has resulted in various kinds of dysfunction, like learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is a term used to describe, it could be an animal or people, that when they're in a situation and they try to make a difference to whatever they're doing, and they can't make a difference over a period of time, they just give up. They don't try anymore. And it's not a function of being Aboriginal, it's a function of being poor. For the last 12 years, we've run a karate club in school in East Vancouver, and if you have kids, you're welcome to take them to our club because the lessons are free. And we found the same attitude in all of the kids, whether they came from Peru or anywhere else. And so what I learned from writing these books that I've written is that we all think we're different because I am Japanese and you're Korean, or we have different cultures, languages, skin color. But what I learned is that if you scratch the surface of people and you put them in the same situation, they will react in the same way. And that's what my second book, The Economic Dependency, was about. There's various kinds of dependency. You know, you just have to look at Eastern Europe or East Germany, and it took East Germans about 50 years to develop the same attitudes as First Nations people, being put in a situation of dependency. And it's a mindset. And I would tell you what all those things were, except my computer's not working. But there's a pattern of behavior, which I'll talk about if I could actually get through this damn thing and look at some of these notes. So the way I felt about this, and in the closing part of the book, I'd written a poem about it. And the poem is called The Storm. The battered canoe pitches on the murky moonlit night, tears reflecting gently in the evening's muted light. An aged chief's heart aches with dreams of days of yore, a time of cosmic harmony on a welcoming, distant shore. He knows the map is out there, in the skies darkened by the storm, evoking distant memories of an ancient reckoning form. So I believe that ancient reckoning form is coming to light. It's coming to light through our young people, through this beautiful young woman who introduced and welcomed everybody here tonight. And the problem that I found, though, was that when you're part of the forest, or you're a tree in the forest, you can't really see the forest. You're inside it. And so in order to understand why all those things were happening to young Aboriginal people and Aboriginal people in general, I had to step out of the forest, and I had to get out of it and see the forest for what it was. And that's what I was trying to do in that first book. And in my second book, I'd written a little poem about that, and it's called The Forest. From a little seed growing tree, no sight beyond, forest hides me, branches reach upward, seeking sky. Can't see the forest, no reason why. Not a problem, following lead. Nature wants more, message to heed. How did I get here? Tree and forest. View too narrow, no heavenly chorus. To see whole wood, need greater vision. Seized with full picture, to make wise decision. And that's what I think we need to do. And that's what I tried to do with that book. And I had some very interesting experiences as a result of my first book. I had an elder from a little community up in Kamloops, and she wanted to talk to me. And she said, I want to talk to you. I've read your book, and I want to buy 50 books. And so I said, that's a lot of books. And I started talking to her. I said, well, why do you want to buy these books? She said, all my life, she said, I felt there was something wrong with me. I felt it was because I was a woman, because I was an Aboriginal woman, because I was from a little town. And she said, after I read your book, she said, I understood it was a specific design of government policy. And I carried all this baggage all my life, and I realized I don't need to. And that's why she wanted 50 books. She wanted to buy them and give them out to her family. And so out of that first book, Dances with Dependency, I started to think about dependency in general. Why is it that as a society we have become much more government dependent? And I started to go back and look at the history of where welfare came from, and I didn't have to go back far. I had to go back as far as the Great Depression and the New Deal that was introduced by FDR in the U.S. I'm good to go, he says. Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm way beyond that. And I started to look at the attitudes of people prior to any form of government largesse. And what I realized was that there is the attitude back in those days was that if you weren't self-reliant, then you really weren't a complete person. It was kind of like that. And there was no forms of welfare. And it wasn't until after the more approaching post World War II America that various forms of welfare started to be introduced, to the point now where the U.S. Society is simply not sustainable. On the last before I get into that, I'll just read you what FDR said about it, and this summarized people's views of the time. Continued dependence on relief induces a spiritual and moral disintegration fundamentally destructive to the national fiber. To dole out relief in this way is to administer a narcotic, a subtle destroyer of the human spirit. It's a violation of the traditions of self-reliance in America. And that was a commonly held view. And I started to think about what forms of dependency exist. There's government-to-government dependency. An example of government-to-government dependency would be, for example, the equalization payments in Canada. A lot of First Nations governments are completely reliant on federal government transfers. There's government-to-citizen. I've talked about welfare. And one thing that really surprised me was a form of dependency that's only recently emerged as a result of the wealth or the easy access to credit in society, called affluenza. And that's become more of a concern in families, because what's happened is people like me who have children think that we're going to give our kids stuff that we never had, and we're sort of living vicariously through them. And what ends up happening is you create a mindset in your child that is similar to somebody on welfare. They have a sense of entitlement. They have inability to cope, and psychologists are worried about this because it can lead to depression. And I thought about, well, I've seen in my family, and I read a line in the song by the Quebecois songwriter Félix Clerc, And the best way to kill a man is to pay him for doing nothing. And I've seen it in my own family, but I didn't really understand why. Why does that exist? And then I remembered when I used to stay with my grandmother when I was a little kid, and she would say to me when I was acting up or something, she said, "Go outside and do something useful and you'll feel better about yourself." And when you're a kid, you interpret that as Granny's kicking me out again. But she was actually saying something very profound. And that has to do with what William James said, the deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. And what I would add to that is to be appreciated by your family, your friends, and your community. And when you get a welfare check, what happens is it bypasses one of the only ways that we as hardwired social animals can validate our sense of self-worth. And when the government's given you a check, you've not done anything for it. But when you work for something, it has a totally different value to you. That's why welfare doesn't work. And it turns out that's why my grandma was kicking me out when I was a kid. And so elements of an economic dependency mindset, and this doesn't just apply to Aboriginal people, this applies to everybody. Sense of entitlement, inability to be self-sufficient, low self-esteem, victim syndrome, you blame, you feel sorry for yourself, learned helplessness, inability to cope, depression, and lateral violence. I didn't even know what lateral violence was. As a karate instructor for the last 30 years, I thought it's when you hit somebody this way as opposed to that way. And what I learned about it is that it can be applied to any group of people. And if you're at the bottom of the social and economic rung, and you can't strike out at those people above you, you start striking out at each other. And that's what happens in poor families, and it happens in poor communities. And all of that, those negative emotions and toxic thoughts become internalized, and it leads to what I called community or group conditioned negativity, where you've been in a situation for so long, and it's negative, and it's always been negative, you start to think that's normal. Unless you're able to step out of the forest and have a look at it and say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't the way this community's working or that society works. So there's issues of learned helplessness and lateral violence. And I invented a new word in this book. I called it undependence, and I call these the Declarations of Independence as a sort of take on the American Declaration of Independence. And so what I learned is that no matter who you are, whether you're a German in East Germany, whether you're a Latino in an inner city or an African American, or whether you're an Aboriginal person in Canada, if you're in a situation of economic dependency, you're going to develop the same mindset towards what's happening. And I brought the kids from our karate club to Germany a couple of years ago, and we went to an East German province. And the people were wonderful hosts, but the older people wanted to go back to the time of communism where the government took care of everything. And the young people said they absolutely didn't want to have anything to do with that. And they wanted, there was an expectation that somebody should take care of all of your problems. So I won't go into these in detail since I'm supposed to be talking about empowerment, but it's important to understand these things because it's part of the journey to understanding, I think, for a lot of people, how they got to where they are. One of the things I did learn from Warren Buffett was one of these principles was the more wealth that you have, like everybody thinks that when they win the big one, when that lottery ticket comes in, Your life is going to be absolutely better. Everything's going to be good. But what happens is if you don't have discipline, if you don't have a very clear idea of what you're going to do with money, it can destroy your family, it can destroy a community, and it can destroy a country. And so that was the... We're hooped here again. Oh, here we go. So the myth that the government will take care of you, there's a whole bunch of problems with that. First of all, having to do with social evolution, we've evolved as social animals to look after each other. That's why there's tribes, that's why there's families. When with the stroke of a pen, once you buy into this welfare mentality, you wipe out thousands and thousands and thousands of years of skills and ability to work together and the structure that you need to survive. When you know, if with the U.S. with 130 trillion in debt, it's probably more like 200 trillion in debt right now. That's the federal, municipal, and state debt and long-term liabilities. That it'll never be paid off. Such a large number. And so what are you going to do? Well, what did we do? The most valuable thing we have as people is what I call the tribal X factor. We supported each other. We worked together. The moment you introduce government money or an artificial source of sustenance into a community, I can remember it when I was a kid. There was no government money coming into our community. When my grandmother needed a house, our tribe got together and we built her a house. The wood was milled, and the expectation is that we would all help the other elders in the tribe when they needed a house built. And that's the way it worked, and it worked really well. Now, the expectation is the government's going to provide you a house, and since you don't have any skin in the game, you're not committed to this house that you have, and I'll explain what I mean by commitment. You don't look after it. And you know, there's a story about a pig and a chicken walking down the road, and the chicken says to the pig, he said, why don't we open up a restaurant? We'll call it Bacon and Eggs. And the pig looks at the chicken. He said, you're only going to be interested in this. He said, I'm committed. And that's the difference when your skin is on the line, literally. The other problem is that this kind of thing locks generations of families into intergenerational poverty, where the parents in the poster child for welfare, the poster child country for welfare, Norway, what they're finding is that when the younger people in the family are growing up to the age where they can get welfare, the parents are pushing them to get welfare because it brings more money collectively into the house, but it just keeps that cycle going. And why would you reward something that promotes dependency and entitlement and leads to dysfunction? And as I've already pointed out, it's not sustainable. This whole system is completely not sustainable, and I won't go through all those statistics, but they're in that book. So I'm really here to talk about the empowerment mindset. And what happened after my first two books is a lot of people came to me and they said, well, you're writing these books at 100,000 foot level. What can I do to help myself? What can I do to help my family? How can I actually do something as a result of these ideas and make a difference to my life? And sort of over the period of time, what's evolved out of writing these books for me is my life's purpose. My life's purpose has become to help people help themselves by providing the knowledge to do so. And in our class in East Vancouver of all these little tiny kids, we got a bunch more little kids came in. And so I asked them, I say, what's your biggest muscle? Lucius knows what it is, right? What is it? Your biggest muscle's up here. It's not in your quadricep or anywhere. It's up here. And so I started to think about that and the knowledge and perspective you need to try to help yourself. So this word reinvention's been around for a long time. I said, and you can reinvent yourself. I've reinvented myself from being a lousy fisherman. And so you have to understand things like think about things. Who has control over you? And what made you the person you are, and these issues of negative emotions. And do these things prevent you from being a coachable person? To be a coachable person, it's like a player in a game. When the coach says, you got to do this and this, can you do that or not? Because that makes a difference to everybody. And it really makes a difference to your family. Because if you don't think about these things, and you continue to be the way you are, if it's not leading to much happiness or it's leading to failure, why do them? So who has the power? You do. When you start thinking about this, you start thinking about what things you can control. Well, what can you control? You can't control everything going on outside of you. The only thing you can control is what's happening inside of you, and the attitudes you take, and the images you visualize. So you can control those things. And then you also can control how you respond to what happens. I've seen people in various walks of life where you have one person that says, oh God, we're doomed. The ship's going down. We're all going to die. And somebody else is looking at it completely differently, saying, well, this is an opportunity. I always wanted to get rid of this old boat. And fishermen commonly do that when it's a bad fishing year. So who made you the person you are? Well, most of the things you learn are from your the people you are to most closely socially, your parents, your family, your friends, teachers. But mostly it's your family. And you learn things, and you learn ways of reacting to things. And I see a lot of people, when something happens, they immediately react, and they're doing all kinds of things. And I see other people who just sit back and don't react at all. They might be just as offended at whatever was going on or what's been said. And you start to see characteristics in families or in groups of people that make them very successful people. It's also important to understand these ideas of negative emotions and toxic thoughts, like blaming other people for whatever's happened instead of being responsible for yourself, being jealous and hating. And all of this stuff just harms you. It takes 10 times the energy to hate somebody as it is to be constructive and actually try to do something with your life that's useful. And it leads to emotional self-sabotage. With those attitudes, you're never going to be able to move forward and succeed. And I think for most people, unless you are a really successful person and you're happy and so on and so forth, a lot of these things bear thinking about. You do have the power to reinvent yourself. In this modern age, where we've developed a very narcissistic society, where everybody's grooming themselves and it's all about me, you know, the me generation, and you want to buy stuff right now for me, you need to understand how I think the ego works in creating self-sabotage, and you have to have some understanding on how to counter those negativities. And this idea of adaptability. People think that Charles Darwin said that it's the fittest that survive. He didn't say that at all. He said this. He said it's the most adaptable. And that's really all I'm talking about. It's not very complicated. What most people have, because it's comfortable to them, is they view life like a static picture like that. It's not going to change. I know it's not going to change, and I can just go about my business. But everything is dynamic. It's changing all the time. And all of this stuff you see from business colleges and stuff about learning to do this and that, it's just really about being adaptable and having a mind where you expect things to change and it's not a threat to you and you don't fear it. There was a Scientific American article that was written a couple of years ago, and it was about how they're now discovering that the Clovis theory about Native Americans or Indigenous people in North America, the idea originally was they came over during the Ice Age and the land bridge from Asia, and that was about 12,000 years ago. Well, they're now finding evidence that they've been here for 17,000 years in various places. And so the archaeologists that were working on this, basically, there were a couple of Canadian guys, they were talking about these first Indigenous people. They said their entire existence and the existence of everyone they knew and the existence of their ancestors was about adapting. They had a toolbox of tactics and strategies. And this is a really, really important idea, because I believe, and I have a fourth book that's coming out in March 2014 called Dances with Spirits, and it's about how this economic system is totally crazy. We've developed an economic system based 70% on personal consumption. And we could sustain that kind of economic system while there were a few Western countries that were sort of using up most of the resources in the world. But with China alone, if the Chinese want the same standard of living as North Americans, we need the resources of 4 worlds. We don't have 4 worlds. We just got this little rock. And so it's going to take a lot of adaptation, but it's also going to take a lot of overcoming entrenched interests in the current system. And so anyways, the reason I had written that book is because here we are, we're in the most successful material civilization ever in history, and we have the most unhappy people probably ever in history. Maybe except before the cavemen when they were starving and stuff. But if you look at it, the levels of loneliness and psychological problems and people hooked on both prescription and illegal drugs, and it goes on, and we're losing the most valuable thing that we have as social animals, which is our families and our friends and our communities supporting each other. And it's all to sell more crap. And it's crap we don't need, and crap the world can't sustain. And so we're going to have to adapt to something that's more sustainable. And so this idea of change, I think it's really important to just recognize that things are changing constantly and not be threatened by it. Don't fear it, and recognize you have the power to adapt to change that in a way that benefits you. So you can counter self-sabotage in lots of different ways. You have to learn to develop what I call a mind of reinvention, and that's to be just completely open. Things come at you left and right, and just accept them, because there's nothing you can do about them anyways. And focus on the things you can do something about. I think you have to have an open heart attitude, and by that I mean being able to emotionally connect to what's happening. In a lot of our society, what's happening is with this technology, everybody is sitting in front of a TV, looking at your cell phone. We're isolating ourselves with our technology, and people don't have very much empathy for each other. And it's really important to have a very big heart to be able to connect to things in a way that's going to make a constructive difference. And when what my dad told me when I was just became a lawyer and I was chasing money is he said, just do the right thing and everything else will follow. And back then I didn't have a clue of what he was talking about, but I sure understand him now. You have to behave right. You have to treat people right. You have to think in the right way. And you have to try to be as best you can, try to be a spiritual person. Because that's really the best part of life. And, we run this little karate club for poor East Vancouver kids for the last 12 years. And my karate instructor, Sensei Nomada, he's losing his eyesight. And when we started the club, he can still teach. He can't work. He's still very physically fit, and he can't work or anything. But he can still teach when the light is fixed. So after a couple of months of doing this, he said, I want to thank you for doing this, he said, because when I go into that club, he says, everybody thinks we're giving something to the kids, but they don't see what the kids are giving back to us. And they give you back pure, beautiful little energy. And there's absolutely no other way to get it. And it's really something that if you don't understand it, you need to understand it and to give back as much as you can. And most people don't do anything because they're afraid they're going to fail. You know what Wayne Gretzky said, that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. You just got to take lots of shots. And as you get older and a little bit wiser, you start taking better shots. You put your energy into things that are likely to work. I won't talk about all this visualization stuff, but I can tell you what I learned from writing these books. Is I wanted to connect to people that could understand what I was saying that didn't have too much education. And so it's very difficult to figure out how to do that when you're used to thinking in complicated language. But all I realized was that all communication is, all language is, all writing is just a way of painting pictures in people's minds. And when people can get that picture in their mind, it's more powerful than anything. if you can combine that picture with an emotional message that reaches people, then they will even buy a book from you. This is the next book that's coming out, and that took me about 7 years to write, even though it looks pretty straightforward. So what I will do right now is I'd written a poem called A Prayer in that book, and I'll just read that, and if you have any questions, I'll like to try and answer your questions. O Great Spirit, seek your light, humble being wanting sight, morning dew, sparkling stream, vision's quest, shaman's dream, puny being, weak and frail, without love, doldrum sail, twinkling star, harvest moon, an open heart, mystic's tune, mighty soul, path I seek, wisdom's muse, poets speak, blade of grass, whispering pine, sipping nature's holy wine, summer breeze, winter chill, standing strong, unbending will, divine creator, at your feet, with nature's love, myself to beat, humility's tears soak the soil, with humble heart I will toil. Wise grandfathers, bless my path, with sacred tears in hallowed bath. Thank you. Anybody have any questions?
What are your thoughts on maybe trying to explain after 71 in the United States and 74 in Canada, how they created money as debt?
That's exactly what I've written about. That's book 4. How if I asked everybody up here how money was created, what would you say? What would the first thing you would say be? Okay. Well, I thought, like most people, money was created by the government. You print it, so on and so forth, right? And actually what happens is 98% of all money in circulation comes from banks. And when a bank makes an electronic entry for that $1 million house you're going to take a mortgage out on, there's a new $1 million put into circulation. And that's the problem with this kind of economy. We've got an economy, first of all, where 70% of consumption, or 70% of the GDP is based on personal consumption. And right now, when the governments are having all kinds of financial problems, what they're saying to ordinary consumers, people, is you've got to buy more stuff. Well, people can't buy more stuff because they're just totally over-leveraged. And the reason the government needs to maintain that kind of position is because the only way they can pay the debt, the interest on the debts that they have, is to grow the economy. And that's the problem of creating money supply from debt. And there are some other ideas out there. there's the other thing about government-created money is there's almost no interest on it because they just print it, right? So why should we give the right to do this to a few people or a few organizations? I mean, right now the world's being run by big banks, and the kinds of horrendous liberties they're taking that impact everybody on the planet. A bunch of the big European banks were caught fixing the LIBOR rate, the international lending rate, and that cost ordinary people zillions of dollars. And the government said, well, we've caught you, you're going to have to pay $1 billion. They said, okay. They paid it because they made that 100 times over. The further problem with that, the kind of economy that we've created, is that when you have, right now, for example, 25% of the world's population using up, I think it's 4.5% of the population, U.S. population, using up 25% of the world's resources, it's just not sustainable. The acceleration of natural resource use from early 1900s to present day is just unbelievable. And with China coming on stream, and now India, Brazil, it's a huge problem for the future of the planet. I mean, you think about it. The Earth is supposedly about 20 billion years old. Out of the cosmos, this little rock formed, and on it, life grew, and out of that came people. And our biggest concern is why we're not happy because we don't have the stuff that we're being told we should have. Where it should be just a privilege to draw a breath. Should be a privilege to have a family and to be safe and to have all the things you need to survive. And so the last book I'm writing, the subtitle is Ancient Wisdom for a Modern World. And in every culture, the knowledge exists for us to survive. I mean, we could, by some views, we're at a very perilous point in our existence. There have been, I think, 5 or 6 extinctions before of life on Earth. And it'd be sad if the next one was made by us because we had to have fancy sneakers. Any other questions?
I'm just curious. I have 2 questions here. How many years do you have an idea of becoming, economically independent for the Aboriginal people, and also at the same time, how did you get that idea?
I got that idea because that's the way my family was. My grandfather was a chieftain of one tribe. My grandmother was a chieftain of another tribe. There's 9 tribes in our community. And my grandfather decided to give up his status for a variety of reasons. One, he was an executive for a fishing company, and Indians weren't legally competent at the time, and so he couldn't actually hold a job. The other reason is he looked at it, and I think he just decided it's no way to bring up a family. You're always going to have your hand out to somebody, and you're going to resent that fact. And so as a result, my dad was a really hardworking guy, and he made sure we were hardworking. I wasn't as hardworking as my older brother there, but he caught way more fish than me. But it's really important. But part of the question too is, well, what do you need to be happy? They've just done a study of 240,000 people around the world, and the happiest people are in the poorest part of the world, and mostly in South America and poor places like that. And so what people have forgotten is they think that, and the whole mantra of modern society is happiness comes from having stuff. But happiness actually comes from your close social relations, your family, your friends, your community, feeling valuable to them, and having a purpose in your life. That's what makes happiness. And it doesn't cost very much money. But that's not a very popular idea in this kind of society, because it's all based on consumption. And all of the manufacturing and stuff that is done is based on phased obsolescence. Things are made to break, so you have to buy new stuff. I'm not going to buy another damn computer again. This one won't even work. Any other questions? Well, I think you just have to look at it on a timeline. It's only been 300 or 400 years that Aboriginal people have been put into a situation of dependency. For 10,000 or 11,000, or if you believe this new archaeological evidence, maybe for 15,000 years, Aboriginal people have survived just fine by being completely self-reliant and independent. And what you're really doing is going back to your roots. And if you look at BC, for example, we have a situation where there were 32 completely different languages that developed on the coast because of the bounty of nature. Each of those languages, they're different. They're different like a difference between German and Chinese. Each of those societies developed all its own social rules, complex social institutions, beautiful arts, and that's really our legacy. And so we're not going back to anything but who our ancestors were, in my opinion. And so why fear being successful at adapting? You had a question?
Have you ever watched the documentary From Freedom to Fascism? I watched it, and just the concept of, we're kind of tiptoeing into a fascist, more of a fascist society than a republic that was supposed to be more free. Where we are, and I think people who were from communist countries or were living through fascist dictatorships are the ones who are trying to wave their hands and saying, warn us about what they see.
Well, my brother was listening to the news today. He said there's 3 senators warning us really loudly. I really don't know what to say about that. At the end of the day, most things are really simple, but we just get things obscured so much by all of the razzmatazz that goes into this kind of market economy. You can't be happy. I mean, it's preached to you from when you're a little kid. You can't be happy because you don't have this. Even if you're a billionaire, you can't be happy because that billionaire's got a bigger boat than you. And so it's all about getting more stuff. And it's just stuff. In fact, the Buddhists are probably essentially right about it. The more stuff you have, the more hassle you have. And I should be happier as a result of that. Any other questions? Hal?
You were in the position of being able to make a change in Canadian policy with respect to the interaction of Aboriginal communities and the rest of Canada. What would those changes be? Would it be, for example, a change in the Indian?
That's a complicated and loaded question. And you know what? If you want people to get to reality, I think it's a natural human tendency if you're in a situation and you've become used to getting something, even though it's nothing, like it's like welfare crumbs or whatever it is, you will maintain that state of slavery, and you'll maintain any fiction that is necessary to keep you in getting those crumbs. You know, what I would hope is that, and why I'm writing these books, is that people will see the self-harm that it's doing to their own families. And there will be a realization that the only way you're going to make a difference is to start with yourself and then start with your family. And if you don't learn the ideas or try to acquire the knowledge or have an open mind or be coachable or any of those things, then what you're going to do is you're going to perpetuate a group of ideas and views that are going to ensure your kids are poor. And I don't think effective change can come from government. It has to come from people. And when people are ready to change, like the lady who wanted to buy 50 books off me, she popped right into action and bought some books. And she handed them out to her whole family. And what she was basically saying to me is, I want my kids to step out of that forest and see what it is, so they can understand. And that's the most powerful thing. When you realize that you have all the power to make any change you want, but it also comes with being responsible. And I know it doesn't answer your question, but but that's as close as I can get. Anybody else?
Do you believe that the values that we hold in this capitalist society can be changed within the communities that are indicated as being reserved, urban reserved, places where people are essentially have been placed in that state of slavery? Like, I understand where you're coming from completely in terms of what you've described as, but what I'm trying to ask is, do you see whether or not the means for escaping this enslavement are available to us, and if so, who do we see to find this type of information out in order to escape that enslavement?
Well, I mean, that's why I'm writing these books. You know, I mean, the purpose of them is to hold a mirror up to people so they can see what's happening. Because it's really difficult. Like, I was brought up on a reserve, and I didn't know why all these awful things were happening to people that were my relatives and friends, and I couldn't understand it. And it's only by coming away for a very long time that I was able to get some kind of perspective to start seeing how all of that worked, and to understand that the way you validate your sense of self-worth to your family, friends, and community is to work for what you get. It's just a basic thing, and that's what my grandmother understood when she was turfing me out the door when I was a kid. It's the knowledge is out there. People just have to be open to thinking about it or accepting it. They don't have to agree with me, but they can explore other ideas or whatever. But I think where you see the greatest change taking place quickly is where people work together, and that's one thing that's really been destroyed in our communities. And it used to be we had to work together because we depended on each other to survive. That's the basis of a tribe, right? So, like my grandmother had her house built by her other tribal members. When another elder needed a house, we helped out. And that was the glue that kept everybody working together. Soon as government money came into our community, there was no cooperation and people were fighting with each other all the time. So that's the first thing. So cooperation and understanding why that's really important. And you see other ethnic groups, when they do stuff, they all band together. Except those Irish guys like at Kennedy over there. But so that's one thing, and the second thing is trying to get a perspective on what happened to you, right? Like what happened to your people. See, what I'm saying in my book 4 is that what the European powers did is they came to North America, and they had superior technology, and so they just overran the Aboriginal populations. That's after they sustained them originally when they came, but they overran them, and they gave no value to Aboriginal cultures, and they've done this all over the world, in Africa and everywhere else. And so what's happening in society is we're getting a situation where we're losing what I think is even more important than genetic diversity. We're losing cultural diversity. At the beginning of this century, there's about 7,000 languages. At the end of this century, there's going to be 600 to 700. So what we're doing is losing 90% of the database of knowledge for how to survive in different environments, and so I think. So basically, what I'm saying is we have to reevaluate what we think is important. You know, is it important that you can look at an iPhone and do all this crap, or is it important that you have a good family and you have a group of people who, no matter what happens, are going to work together and you're going to survive successfully? It's the most important thing. Sean?
Calvin, I'm happy to see a lot of parallels in your book, The Empowerment Mindset, and another social movement, empowerment mindset has risen in Canada this year. I'm talking about several hundred youth walking 800 kilometers from the Cree youth from the north to Ottawa. And I'm talking about people in a small community speaking out for water rights and health. And of course, I'm speaking about the empowerment mindset of something called Idle No More. And that could even be a subtitle for your book, I think. I was wondering if you could speak just very briefly about the positive parallels between what you're saying in your book, The Empowerment Mindset, and what we're seeing about walk for reconciliation and Idle No More, and what's happening in the world right now.
Well, what's happened is that large parts of the world have become controlled by oligarchies. It's people with the money are running everything, and the people in the middle are just getting beat up, and that's why you had the Wall Street protests, and I believe the Arab Spring protests, the riots in London, and I think the Justice Minister in London's name was Kenneth Clark, and he said he described the people that were rioting as a feral underclass, a wild underclass who exists outside all of the institutions and so on. And more parts of the world are getting that way. I think the very positive thing about Idle No More is it was young people getting together and trying to make change. And that was very positive. And they demonstrated very clearly what a group of people can do to throw a scare into the mainstream society about having the economy disrupted and so on. But I think what that really speaks to is the growing gulf between people that are incredibly poor and people that are becoming ever more rich. I think it's something, three of the richest people in the world have more wealth than 600 million of the poorest people. There's something wrong with that equation. And if things aren't shared out properly, but the only thing that is a little bit disturbing to me is that at a high level, everybody has to maintain the fiction that everything's okay. Nobody saw the Great Recession of 2008, except some non-economist people who said, this doesn't make any sense to us, and I think it's going to crash. And all the economists were saying to me, you guys don't know what you're talking about, and then it crashed. And so, we've made the new high priests of our society are these economic people and bankers. And it used to be that there was a very high level of morality associated with what they were doing because that's the way they were brought up, that's the way society was, and they were in very powerful positions, but not now. I've documented so many excesses of banks and they just breached the rules. No one's ever gone to jail. No one ever went to jail over all of the frauds that were committed in the subprime mortgage. I mean, they brought the world economy down by flipping paper just so that they could make money, and individuals making money, and they created huge problems for the rest of the entire planet. And so I think what you're going to see is a growth in grassroots movements, because people are pretty fed up with not being heard. Any other questions? Okay, 1, 2, and 3.
I was wondering what you think of the Secret, that book Secret. One of the millionaires is saying that 10% of the people own the 20% of the world's resources, and there's a secret. They understand something. That's what he was saying. I want to know what you think of that statement.
I don't know if there's a secret. I mean, some people are just awfully good at corralling stuff. And, you've got cultures that are very good at it. And a lot of the Northwest Coast cultures were really good at corralling stuff. They were, compared to the prairies tribes, the Aboriginal people on the West Coast were very materialistic because we had lots of time to do stuff, right? Their fish was easy and all that kind of stuff. And but it is, I think it's clearly the case that a few people by bending the rules or controlling the system in Australia right now, a big outcry has gone out because a few natural resource moguls are basically controlling the country. And there's a lady, I think her name is Gina Reinhardt, and she will be the richest person in the world. She's got $52 billion in assets or whatever now. She'll have 124 very soon. And that's probably 1,000 times more than the thousands of Aborigines on whose land her wealth is derived from, or all of the other poor people there, right? So there's no no justice in it. And sensible people are starting to say this gulf between the rich and poor is going to cause real problems in society. It is already. I think there's probably a few Arab leaders who wish they dealt with things a little bit differently. There was another question.
Hi, I had the pleasure of seeing you speak when you had written your first book, and hearing you now, it seems like things have developed a lot more, and that after writing a number of books, that it's actually really pleased to hear what you're sharing, what you have to say. I'm an Aboriginal, I'm a member of the Squamish Nation. One of the things that I was wondering, is having thought about a bit about what you were sharing. You share about the market economy. In many respects, that also creates a cycle of dependency because it disconnects us from our lands, our traditions, our values, and our subsistence economy. So in many respects, we're almost, it creates a cycle of dependency through capitalism and consumerism. Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think we've not just developed a market economy, we've developed a market society. And that is, it used to be that decisions were made for specific things, economic things, in a market sense, but now all of the things that we used to think were not part of the market are now being put into the market. Like decisions about government programs and stuff. Like everything's become a market society. I think when you start to rely on something too heavily, like when people lose their cell phones and you see them going into cell phone absence addiction, or you get into a situation where there's just too much reliance placed on something. But the problem is that I always try to be realistic about things, and the problem is the whole population's growing like crazy on the planet, and I don't know how many people how possible it would be to subsist off the land. And when I was a kid, our dad used to bring us out fishing, and he used to hunt and stuff. But geez, that was hard work. I understand what you're saying, and I think that there is too much reliance in a way on this kind of model, but it's a model that they've sold, and the problem is the what do you do if you stop this story that you're telling everybody, that consumerism is good and it's the only way we're going to survive and blah blah blah. How do you, if you're a government official, how do you deal with issues of trying to comfort your voters if you ever want to get reelected again, and actually, like our whole system, like we at least need to start talking about this. And so, anyways, you had a question. I am a great believer in Mark Twain's comment that he never let his schooling get in the way of his education. Book learning is one thing, but the most useful things I've ever learned was by being a real lousy fisherman and other things like that. I think book learning is very important. I mean, it gives you the tools to, read and digest stuff. But I think if you just look at the Canadian situation, if you're Aboriginal, you're desperately needed in the economy for something. And they're hiring all kinds of people from all over the place for different things. This has now become widely recognized in government that they're running these Aboriginal employment programs and training programs not because they're being altruistic. It's because it's actually less expensive for them to do that than to bring in immigrants. And so my advice to anybody is if you're young and you can figure out what your purpose in life is, and what your purpose in life is whatever gives you the most joy when you do it. And for me, at my late age, I found out that that was writing. And that's what I love to do. And it gives meaning to my life because of what I'm trying to do. But it could be anything. And the sooner you find that out, I think the better life you're going to lead all the way from then on.
Could you answer one? Hi. Could you answer one more question?
Sure.
Almost more than 40 years ago, Harold Cardinal, one of your fellow Albertan frontiers, wrote a book called The Unjust Society. Have you? You're familiar with it?
Yep.
You may even have read it. In what way what you said, what you propose, would be an effective way to redress it, to bring that into, to mitigate, to eliminate the kind of unjust that the Canadian system, Canadian government, Canadian society that impose on, in this particular case, the native population in Canada. And I suppose one follow-up is that in doing so, are you in what way that the First Nation people could getting into becoming more equal members in a just society, but without being sucked into the kind of pitfalls that the Canadian society that we have right now. As I say, you still have the kind of disparity between, different groups and different pockets and that kind of thing. Do you follow my question?
I think I do. I think what a lot of what Harold Cardinal said in that book was related to government policy and that kind of thing.
More than that.
Yeah, but I think that if that's all you're focusing on, you're letting somebody else define you. Like, you don't have the power to. You always got to go to the government and ask them to do something for you. My advice, and I'm going to ask everybody to say this with me, is waiwa. Now say it like you mean it. Waiwa. Is just do it. You have to go out and do something. And I think, a lot of the only way that this society gives you any kind of recognition is if you have economic power. So we don't have to destroy the environment, but you have to acquire the ability to have some economic power, because nobody listens to anything else. And I think that's just a practical thing. But I think, and what I've written in my fourth book about, is that the medicine man, the Sioux medicine man, Crazy Horse, when he was a very remarkable person. He lived. He didn't want any attention. He was a medicine man. He was doing his own thing. But because of the way he carried himself, and he believed, and he didn't want to go onto the reservations that the all of his tribal members were being put on. And so everybody that was there resented him. But he made a prophecy. He was actually killed by his own people when he was being arrested on his reserve, or the reserve they had at that time. But he was smoking a pipe with Sitting Bull, and he made a prophecy, and he basically said in 7 generations, and I'm just paraphrasing, these greedy Europeans who are taking everything, like they're pushing the Indians onto these little small pieces of land and taking everything. He said they're going to come back to Aboriginal people to find the knowledge to live successfully, to move forward. And I think if Aboriginal people had an ace in the hole, that's it. And so I think that knowledge is still there. You know, there's intermittent patterns. It exists in other cultures as well, but most people aren't paying attention to their own cultural wisdom, and a lot of it's been lost. And I find in a lot of the writing and study I do, I find real parallels between a lot of Chinese ideas and Chinese philosophy and Aboriginal.
Well, it's interesting that you make a reference. I didn't bring up the Chinese. In fact, I went to China, being a Chinese. Even though I was growing up in Canada, but being Chinese, I can see the kind of the situation in China today is very much that I talk about, that they get sucked into that. You know, they want to be like the West, like the Western people, the capitalists, and in fact, they are repeating the same kind of problem in a magnified ways in China today.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
Sean and I have spent a lot of time there, and the pollution that's there is crazy.
The gap between the rich and the poor, the kind of conspicuous consumption, the blind faith in everything Western, junk food, salty goods, the pollution you talk about, you know, then that's what the second question I've asked you. How, in what way do you think that the First Nation people in Canada able to avoid the kind of pitfall while getting kind of a benefit that you talk about?
Well, it's a very difficult question, because all of us, we hear nothing but talk about how we should be consuming things from when we're little kids. All of us, the whole society just died in this. And you know, the budgets for marketing stuff to people, especially kids, are huge. And so it's a really difficult problem. But an interesting thing that I wrote about in this book was about when I was talking about the value of cultures, because I have a very high respect for a lot of Chinese culture, because it's so old and it's been recorded for such a long time. But the ideas are very similar to a lot of Aboriginal. But when the first Jesuit priests went into China, and they came across the I Ching, they thought it was just a book of divination. But in a practical culture, it's a book of wisdom. And they didn't understand that, so they declared it heretical. And it's kind of like what happened with the Western culture and Aboriginal cultures. And what I'm saying is, hey, wait a minute. There is a ton of value in the wisdom if you can understand it, in all cultures, no matter who they are. And we've got to start paying attention to it.
Thank you, everyone, for staying. We're going to bring up Marissa one more time to close the evening. I just want to mention and thank the UBC Learning Circle for supporting this event, as well as the First Nations Student Association. What our goal here at SFU is to do is twofold. One is to academically, culturally, and personally support all of our Aboriginal students, Métis students, and Inuit students. And on the other hand is to educate and to bring these type of ideas to the community abroad here in Vancouver and tonight across Canada, thanks to the UBC Learning Circle. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.
Hoichka, thank you. If I could get everyone to hold their hands up, fingertips at heart level, and say Hoichka. Bless you. Just kidding. No, Hoichka means thank you in the Squamish language, and it means my heart is full. So thank you, Calvin Helin, for sharing your words and your thoughts, and thank you, Hoichka. It's an amazing thing when you talk about in your book how the basic qualities of human beings is that to belong and family in your communities. And the way I could relate to that is my grandfather, he told us, he told my mom and our siblings, and it trickled down through everyone in our families, that if you go on welfare, I'm going to disown you. So that's been our mentality in our families, that like our grandfather's word is law. So if any one of us would, none of us are on welfare. So that's pretty amazing in itself, and it really shows that you really need to have a sense of belonging. And the way I could relate to what you were saying is 4 years ago I became extremely ill, and I went through kidney failure, and it was a devastating part of my life. And having a strong background in I was achieving goals, the 1-year plan, 5-year plan, 10-year plan. My whole life was planned out, and I'm going to go to school, have a family, and everything. And I worked at my dream job, and I had the best job, and everything was perfect and going according to plan. And then I got sick, and it was very devastating. I've never was the one that got sick in the family. I was the one that took care of everybody. If somebody's in the hospital, I'm there to help them. I didn't make lots of money. I was an intern, but any money that I had, I shared. And, so I thought I did everything right. And but when I got sick, I started becoming in debt and everything. And then you start to reflect on your life, and you say, well, what's my core values, and what am I striving for? Why am I striving for all this materialistic values? And it has a happy ending. I'm still alive. And my mother, and I actually come here with my parents. It's very rare that you'll ever see me without my parents. But my mom donated her kidney to me, and I got a transplant. And it's 2 years successfully in August. But then I realized what's really important to me. Am I going to be this big, top, superficial person? Or what's really important to me are my traditional values, my culture, and my family. And what really makes me happy. Going from extremely academic and everything had to be administrative, and now I'm an artist. I'm going to school for Northwest Coast Art Jewelry and learning how to paint and carve and my traditional values and learning more about legends. And I'm not rich at the moment. I will be maybe, but I'm rich in family, and I'm the happiest I've been in a long time because I have my close family that makes me extremely happy. I have a tight knit of close friends, my friends who stuck it out with me in my hospital bed, and every day I'm learning something new, and it's exciting. So I'm excited to read your book. I'm going to read your book, and I'm not sure if anyone's seen outside. His book is outside for sale. And thank you for having me. And I really wish that everyone who's here tonight and listening all across Canada, that if you're traveling, right now it's foggy in Vancouver, so I hope that each and every one of you have a safe travel home to your loved ones. And everyone online has a safe place. And if anyone has anyone triggered, or if they have any issues, if they have someone close to talk to. And so thank you, Hojka, and I wish everyone a safe drive home. Hojka.
Good night.